Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for some of you, and welcome. I'm Noah Pickus. I'm the Chief Academic Officer at the Minerva Project. My background is I've worked at large state universities, small liberal arts colleges. I spent 25 years as a faculty member doing strategy for Duke University, building a campus in China. And I'm now completing a book called Global Startup U, about 8 universities that have started in the 21st century and what lessons we might take from that. But of course, what we're doing here today is talking with 2 leaders and with all of you about not starting a new university, but running one while trying to change it from the inside. I'm delighted to be joined here by Julio Frenk, the president of the University of Miami, and Koldo Echebarria, the director general of the Esade School of Business in Barcelona. This is, I told Julio and Koldo, this is more like the ideal dinner conversation that I hope we might put together, where we have about 30 minutes or so for me to ask Koldo and Julio just a few broad questions to get them thinking and telling us a little bit about not only what they've been doing and why they've been doing it at their institutions, but especially how. Because everybody who's here is in the midst of transformation or trying to bring about transformation at their institution and as part of reform in global higher education. So let me say very briefly here, we have, with Julio Frenk at the University of Miami, Minerva Project has been working with them. They're coming up on their 100th anniversary, their new century, and they have launched a New Century College, which is a kind of internal incubator for educational change. And Minerva has been working with them initially to build a 3-year accelerated program in entrepreneurship, innovation, and design. It's a hybrid program with both online and offline learning, heavily experiential, with a lot of work in the field, working with businesses and organizations. And it's drawn on faculty. It's been astonishing to me, Julio, from engineering, arts and sciences, law, business, communications. It's truly wonderful just to walk into that room. And at Esade, the partnership there has focused on, if I'm correct about this, Koldo, it's the first new major since the founding of Esade, which is not a small thing to undertake. And it's a BA in transformational business and social impact, which combines what Minerva does in its educational curricular expertise with the deep subject matter expertise, as at Miami, of the faculty there, and also has an experiential focus and where students complete startup plans before as a matter of graduation. Now, you might be asking, why did I just tell you all that instead of our guests? And the reason is because I know they can tell you much about that. But as I said, we want to focus on the why and the how. And so let me start the conversation by inviting you to tell us a little bit about the context that brought you to this project. What's the context for you at Miami, and what's the problem that you have set out to solve?
Well, thank you, Noam, for organizing this conversation. I think it's a fascinating moment to be having this conversation, because obviously there were a lot of large changes happening before the pandemic. The founding of Minerva is one of those. But the pandemic has greatly accelerated those changes. And I think it's impressed on all of us a sense of urgency. I have come to higher education through a much more circuitous road. I'm by training a public health physician, and I have a PhD in sociology as well. I've been in academia most of my life, but I've also been the Minister of Health of Mexico, and I worked at the World Health Organization. This is actually my 5th pandemic that I've had direct experience with. But I was very fortunate to be asked to serve as the Dean of the School of Public Health at Harvard University just in that very productive decade. So I was there from 2009 until I moved to the University of Miami as president. I saw the birth of the MOOCs, the year of the MOOCs in 2012, and I quickly embraced the need for educational innovation as an imperative for universities, because for whatever reason, education was one of the few fields of human endeavor that did not experience a technological revolution in the 20th century. I mean, compared to medicine, my other passion, and you will see a dramatic contrast. And yet I had the distinct feeling that that revolution was happening exactly at that point. And so, my school did the first edX course from the Harvard side. We did the first mostly online masters in the history of Harvard. And I was very much into that and very motivated when I got the invitation to lead the University of Miami. And so, as you said, Noah, we are getting ready for our first century. It's still a young university, but it's a university that's already been tried through very difficult times, and has thrived and grown enormously over this century. So, as I came here, the strategic plan for the university, which is called the Roadmap to Our New Century, this is happening in 2025, just 3 years from now. One of the 5 strategic priorities is what we call education for life. That's our guiding concept. And the idea of education for life is that it has 2 meanings. It's education that lasts your entire life. It's also education that prepares you for life, prepares you to lead a rewarding life where you achieve whatever aspirations you have set for yourself and for your community. It also prepares you to be a valuable member of your local, national, and global community. And under that, one of the top projects is leading the education revolution as a major part of our strategy. So we were already there. What made me enthusiastic is the realization of 3 major changes. One is the advances in cognitive sciences. And one thing I love about Minerva is the fact that it is deliberately was created with an idea of translating some of those advances in our understanding of the way humans learn into specific programming. The second is new technologies that are being applied to the educational endeavor. And then the third, and probably most consequential, is that our students are graduating into the most dynamic labor market in history. And while they're inside the university, new careers are being created and existing ones are being disrupted and transformed. So the idea of a front-loaded model where you front-load content and cost, and then you send students out into what we call the real world is obsolete. That closed system notion that you take somebody, a young person, typically, put them through a process which is good and enriching, and then send them out is completely obsolete. We need to adopt an open architecture, which is the idea of education for life, an education that prepares you to lead a life. And with those were the motivating factors. And that's why in my first year as president, I knew about Minerva because obviously of the important role of Ben Nelson, and at that point still Steve Kosling, who had come from Harvard. I was familiar with his work on cognitive science. I started exploring that, and with the pandemic, this came to fruition. You said something in your introduction. This is the last thing I'll say. Is yeah, we're not a new university. We are going to be 100 years, still young by university standards, but not new. So one of the challenges we have is how do you keep improving on what you're already doing while you disrupt from within? Instead of waiting disruption to happen to you from the outside, you disrupt from within. And we don't have the luxury of putting a little sign at the entrance of the university that says closed for repairs or improvements. We need to keep doing what we're doing while we innovate. And that's where we came up with the idea of the New Century College, which is, as you very aptly described, an incubator of innovation. And we decided to partner with Minerva with a whole new degree, a Bachelor of Science, focused on innovation. It's also coincided with a big migration of tech entrepreneurs and investors into the Miami area, a side effect of the pandemic. So to fully realize that movement, And it's just been a wonderful experience that I can elaborate on. And I think our idea is that this is a space for experimentation. We want to experiment, we want to try things out, and we want to assess rigorously. The minute anything that's new or innovative demonstrates its superiority with current practice, we mainstream it into the rest of the university. So it's not a siloed sort of skunks work area where we toy with education. We are firm believers in assessing and then mainstreaming, and that's the way we're proceeding with this, with the idea of disrupting from inside. While we continue to improve what we already do, how do we introduce that element of institutional change?
Julio, thank you. That sets the table so well, and there's so many threads to pull on that. Koldo, let me invite you in. What's the context that you're operating in Europe, and what is the problem that you set out to solve?
Yeah, first of all, let me say that I am also, let's say, an unconventional leader of a university institution. I was a professor at Esade in the 90s, but then I left and I went to Washington. I joined the Inter-American Development Bank, and I was there for almost 20 years, most of them in different executive positions. And I was the director of the bank in Haiti, and I was called by my university to come back as the CEO. And well, I have been in touch with Esade because every year I came and I delivered a seminar, a sort of course, but I had not been in the management of the school or even the faculty of the school as a full-time member for a very, very long time. So I came in, and I would say there were a number of dimensions for the why of the transformation of the school that we focused on. I would say the first, and this is, and let me say, Esade is not a big university institution. We have more or less 4,000 students of undergrad and postgraduate, which is not big. We only have a business school and a school of law. We run 3 undergrads now 4, and we have a Master's of Science and an MBA, an Executive MBA, and Executive Education. We are very well ranked and recognized as a business school, and we are in the rankings very well placed. But still, we are a small school. But anyway, there were a number of dimensions to the why I would like to emphasize, and many of them, by the way, are exactly the same to what Julio was saying. And I am amazed because we have never talked, and I am amazed by the number of thoughts and ideas that actually we share. Because I can exactly made mine many of the words that he has said. But first of all, we run into an economic also issue. It has been said, I mean, in general, universities have not profited from technology to become more productive, and we have been passing our costs to the students or to the state, depending on the nature of the university. There is, I would say, a very big productivity challenge in universities. If we want to cope with the need in society of educating more people for the economic transformation that the economy is going through, we need to become much more productive. In our case, that meant that it was difficult to sustain our costs only with increased revenue. I believe that this is, generally speaking, and if you have your own space, more a revenue than a cost-saving business. But still, I believe that we need to introduce more productivity in what we do. We run, for example, an enormous amount of face-to-face classes that were not necessary according to the, I would say, the needs of our students or the effectiveness of the programs. And we thought that we could change that and run a much more, not only effective, but efficient operation as well. When I came here, the revenues of the schools were growing at 5%. The costs were increasing at 10%. So it was not sustainable in the long run. And we needed to make a number of decisions in relation to new areas of growth, and at the same time in closing a number of programs or revamping a number of programs. That was one thing. And from that point of view, the idea of adding technology to the equation and increasing productivity was very, very, very important. The second thing has been said. We are an institution which is very much oriented towards pedagogy. And this is very much where in Barcelona. Barcelona is a city with many institutions in the educational business with a mind in pedagogy. And we're very, very much enthusiastic by Minerva's approach on the effectiveness of learning and the way the learning experience can translate into effective learning. And I would say when Julio is trained in medical science, I know not, but I believe sometimes that our education is like medical science like 200 years ago or so. So we don't work according to evidence. We don't teach according to the evidence of the effectiveness of what is the result of what we do. And there's a lot of knowledge, as he said, on the cognitive sciences of what works and what doesn't work. And in fact, this is even consistent with the previous dimension, because we can do better and more efficient our educational experience, more satisfactory, more effective, but also much more efficient in terms, especially what relates to the use of the time of faculty and the interaction between faculty and students. So there was another important point that we were searching for evidence on what works, and we of course thought that technology could be a very essential instrument of this transformation to become more efficient and more effective. And I would say third and very important as well was the feeling that we had, and then we ran a number of analyses, that the demand from our employers, from the employers of our students, was changing very, very fast. And this had to do with basically, I would say, two things, which are as well related to another one. They told us, well, from a cognitive point of view, from the technical learning of your students, I mean, you are not very different to other universities. I mean, you train your students on the basics of management, of law, or whatever, reasonably well. But that is not really the reason that we recruit from your student base. It is somewhat different. It is the skills that you provide. It's the fact they told me that your students are, this is an expression that some of them use, they're plug and play. So they can be ready to work, and they can be ready to be jumped into the pool and start to swim. And it is true, we are in that sense a very professional school, and we have a lot of practitioners working with us. So, and we simulate in a lot of ways the experience of work, and that implies that our people are ready to go somewhere and start a business and be effective on it, or relatively effective on it. Then there was, and these conversations get into even other topics, and what specifically that you evaluate well, and what are the issues that you find are not right. And they also mentioned, for example, that being in our case a relatively expensive school and recruiting mainly from students on the top of the socioeconomic pyramid, they felt that there was an issue of resilience in our students. They were good culturally in culturally diverse settings, because we're also very international. We have a 60% intake from international students, but there were issues in terms of the resilience when they got into a difficult problem, they got frustrated, and so on and so forth. No, so you make a conclusion of all these observations is that we need to train for a skill set which is very demanding, changing quite a lot, and that the businesses that recruit us value very much. And I would say that they try to recruit a person with a set of skills that can evolve in a way that can be adaptable to different contexts of the business. And this also relates to what Julio was saying. He was saying that you aspire to educating for life. We have a different expression. We say that we educate to install in the students a sort of operational system, not apps. So it's a mode of thinking that allow them to grow, and to grow in professionally and also and also in life. And then there is this also Jesuit dimension, where a Jesuit school, which is important in terms of the values that we propose. I mean, values are not, cannot be taught, but they are learned, in the sense that if you provide an environment where students can get inspired, they would get some of these values. But the emphasis of Minerva in a basic skill set, like the one that you provide in your first year, which is the one that we have taken into our new degree, was very important, and also another reason that we thought was critical in our whys and our transformation at Esade. But I will stop there.
Oh, it's perfect. Both of you have, I mean, these are key points. I hope everyone wrote down operating system, not apps. That's a new one for me. I like that. Both of you have sketched these broad dynamics that we all are familiar with and living through. I note the focus on efforts at greater efficiency, at more of a focus on evidence, and at how you differentiate your institution and your students, because education from 30,000 feet away looks the same to most everybody. But when you get up close, and here's where I want to push the conversation. These are wonderful. These are problem statements. They're context setting. They're setting out a vision about education for life. Okay, now let's come to the harder part. How you make this change happen. Julio, as you mentioned, and we've talked about before, there's running an institution, which is a complex, multi-stakeholder. Everybody agrees at 100,000 feet what universities are for. Nobody agrees on the ground. Tell us about how you think about the process of change. Who the stakeholders are. Did you anticipate resistance? What have you run into? What strategies have you begun to employ to, because in your own context, I suspect there's some things similar for all of us, and there may be unique features. So if I can change the metaphor from the dinner table to going into the auto repair shop, let's get under the hood now.
Sure. I'm sure everyone around the table, the virtual table, will have similar experiences. But one thing we know is that education is a very powerful socializing tool, and therefore we tend to teach the way we were taught. That's just a natural reaction. So we need, and furthermore, most universities didn't actually take seriously the development of competencies in pedagogy and in the art of teaching and the science of learning. This has been a relatively recent discussion, but most of our PhD programs, which were meant to produce the professoriate of the next generation of professors and academic workers, simply did not include that. It was sort of thought that that's something you would pick up. In addition, if you are a research university like mine, we've all dealt with the issue of education being a secondary activity. It's the research that produces the rewards, the academic recognition, etc. I mean, even the language we use. I'm in a campaign to eradicate the term teaching load. Teaching should not be a load. It almost conveys that idea that you're being distracted from what you really care about, which is your research or your scholarship. So there was, like in most universities, some headwind, but at the same time, and I'll answer your question, the first thing was to make teaching exciting. And what I think is that those first two forces, the advances in cognitive science and the new technologies, have made it now much more intellectually exciting. The second strategy, so that was the first one. Just to talk about that, we have a school of education. We transformed it to have a major department on teaching and learning, to show that this is a cutting edge field of research and technological development. The second thing was to identify internal champions who already were practicing some of the innovation, who had switched from the model. And we created a cadre, we call them academic innovation fellows. And, to work with Minerva, we actually assembled the first group of 12, and we're actually now recruiting the second cohort. They've been working very closely with their peers at the Minerva project. And that's been a very, very productive, but it was showing by demonstration that this was possible. The third issue was to take advantage of the pandemic. The pandemic's main contribution, as most universities had to pivot suddenly to an online format, was not in the solution that was enacted when we moved. That was an emergency response. That should not be the status quo of post the pandemic. Most professors just took their same passive lectures, the same passive PowerPoints, and just started showing them by Zoom. So they were as passive as before, with the added disadvantage that you couldn't even read the nonverbal cues that students send when you are in an actual room. That's not the future. But what the pandemic did was mostly a cultural change. So it actually, we actually have measures of how prior to the pandemic, there was a lot of resistance of the traditional faculty to teaching online. They discovered the advantages and the conveniences. And almost after the pandemic, we almost had a role reversal. It was the faculty who wanted to keep teaching and the students who were desperate to come back to the classroom. And I think we need to capitalize on that and make sure that we don't allow a regression to the previous technophobia that is so common among faculty. And then our last strategy was, forgive me for the medical metaphor, but to avoid the immune response to innovation, that's why it's so hard to innovate from within, because there's immediately an immune response. You have all these governance structures which will try to bureaucratize the process of approval, and that's where the idea of the New Century College came. It's not an actual physical college. It's a college in the sense of an aggregation of fellows, of people, like-minded people. But the idea was to create an area for piloting and then do exactly what Koldo said, apply the paradigm we have used for medical innovation, which is you have basic research like we now have in education, you develop a new approach, you then test it. And anything, now we don't do clinical trials in education, and obviously the methods are different, but then you assess. And once you assess, whatever proves to be superior to the previous standard of practice is then mainstream. So those have been the tactics to overcome the inertia of literally centuries of teaching the same way, which we now need to transform, taking advantage of these forces that are currently operating in the world.
So it's fascinating, Julio, to think about this, that the new century in Miami, as you say, everyone is leaving Silicon Valley for Miami, which will provide great experiential opportunities for your students in this program. And if we go across the ocean to Spain, and Koldo, I know you and I have talked a little bit about the higher education landscape in Europe and in Spain in particular, which is very different from the US and some other parts of the world. And you have an institution deeply committed to some fundamental notions of society and of character, which is wonderful. You have a sense of context and commitment, but it also means you can have a place that is resistant to change and dubious about it. And I think you've encountered some of that immune response. What was that like, and how did you think about and strategize around that?
Yes, absolutely. We have encountered a number of resistance, I would say, from inertia, but also from interests and from shareholders that also may have issues with the transformation of the school. Let me say, I have to say that we did something first at the beginning of my mandate, which was very instrumental, which is to include in our strategic plan, and don't misunderstand me, I think that in general, strategic plans are very much overrated. Yeah, very few strategic plans really provide a strategy, but they can provide a sort of formal legitimation if you include a number of things that you are committed to do. And that's what we did. We included in the, and that wasn't not the most important thing. There was the issue of economic sustainability was coming very clearly at the strategic plan. That was important to set a different course. But also we had started with some hybridization of programs. And then as a matter of fact, we decided in the plan is that we were committing to objectives of hybridization in all school programs, which was a way of saying here is the overall framework in which you have to introduce yourself. And at the same time, there was the commitment of starting this new program that you have mentioned. So that was an important thing to move things along. And I have to say, and we also use the pandemic for legitimation. The objectives of hybridization were set for 4 years, and they were achieved in the second year, just because of the pandemic. And it was clear from that point of view that there was no way back, and it worked very well. I think that, and as Julio said, it is a cultural thing. I think that the pandemic allowed us to eliminate the stigma in relation to online learning. And we had some evaluations, by the way, that our hybrid learning work better from an effectiveness point of view than our face-to-face learning in some executive programs. So we were able to show that, and we were able to make sure we ran a lot of surveys during the pandemic, and we were quite successful. Even we were successful in the results of the exams. And there were other reasons you want for that to happen, not only the way we ran the online sessions. We had and we reinforced our Institute of Educational Excellence with a lot of means to increase support to faculty. So that was also something that was positive in that regard. The other thing is that we initiated a lot of new programs in our executive education. Our executive education was in the need of a very strong transformation, and we have started new programs. Minerva is a very important partner of us in some of the executive education programs that we are doing, even overseas, and we can link the technology of Minerva and also the skills orientation of Minerva with our cognitive offer and provide interesting and new concepts in executive education. But possibly the most important thing that we did, and that was done to some extent on a stealth. And I say we did something that was a little bit more under the radar of what Julio did. I didn't believe that we had the capacity to set a new college. We are small, and this was not probably the case, but I didn't want to go, I didn't want to antagonize possibly very directly the faculty with a program that was challenging the existing programs, because I could imagine the argument of cannibalization. I could foresee the argument that the new one is the good one, the old one is the bad one, and so on and so forth. So I attach a very small group of people, very much in the same spirit that Julio was saying, people generally young, people who were committed to teaching and who were good teachers and who had experience in running programs at the school, to run with me the ideation phase of the program. And we also looked to a number of other programs that were similar. We had a few consultants coming from the school, and we ran the process of working with it with, I would say, some of the faculty. We call this program the Trojan horse, in the sense that we were introducing this program so people in the school will get the impression that this was interesting, that this was something worth doing. This is a program very much based, is a program addressed to entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs with the purpose of social impact, if you want. Which is, we thought that it was this program could address to a small percentage of the applicants to the Esade programs, but we already thought we had these people that could go into this program. And we completely redesigned the courses. We introduced the Minerva platform. We introduced a whole space of Socratic discussions in the program, a lot of learning by doing through projects, interdisciplinary projects, and the experience is being very, very successful. We have this year many more applicants than we had last year for the same program, most of them international. And what we see now is that momentum is starting, so the learning that has occurred in this program is being applied to the old programs. And this is a process that will allow for this, Trojan horse effect to be successful. Of course, we went through the official authorization process, and this, as you say, in Europe, universities are extremely regulated. But it is a regulation which works very much on paper. So it's what you say in a paper, it's not what you do. And with the same paper, you can do very different things. And if you know the game, you can, I'm not saying that you're tricking the system. No, you're playing with the system and with the rules of the system. But there's a lot of space, even complying with the rules, for innovation if you're smart at what you are doing. So there is that space. Not many universities are viewing this space because they are not ready to innovate in the way they teach, in the way learning happens. But if you want to do that, you can, of course, do it.
I'm struck by the extent to which in both of your programs, the social impact in business and in non-governmental and other areas is so central, and that it occurs to me that the students going through these programs who may or may not understand this, I suspect they will think of themselves as pioneers, and that you will attract the kind of students. I know when we built the liberal arts college in China, and I wondered who in the world is going to apply to this, and I discovered it was the most remarkable students who had been learning Chinese in the mountains of North Carolina, and I never knew that. And they just all wanted something wildly different. But that what I imagine is that going through this program, which is itself an entrepreneurial internal venture, may itself provide some of the best education for the students, quite along with the actual specifics of the program. Well, I have I have many more questions. I could go on forever, but I'd be a very poor host if I did that.